A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Caldwell Soames Incorporated, investing globally in transformative businesses like Original Digital Corporation, or ODC. ODC develops advanced consumer and commercial fintech solutions such as OG Pay, which will transform the way you manage your money. From sending and receiving money globally for free, paying for goods and services in person and online, pay bills, buy and sell digital currencies, all while earning interest. OG Pay is easy to set up, FDIC insured, and your information is secured. Check out ogpay.com.
Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Joining us in our Millennial Mom segment brought to us by Caldwell Soames. Today we are featuring my dear friend, Allison Josephs, founder of Jew in the City. Jew in the City aims to reverse negative associations about religious Jews by highlighting an approach based on kindness, tolerance, sincerity, and critical thinking. Today, we are chatting about the groundbreaking New York Times article and about the dismal state of secular education in the Hasidic yeshivas in Brooklyn and the lower Hudson Valley that elicited much heated discussion all over social media in the last few weeks. Scandals that reinforce the many negative associations with Hasidic and Orthodox Jews, like the New York Times report at the heart of this interview, hit the papers all too often. Public opinion is at best uneducated about Judaism and at worst intolerant of Hasidic and Orthodox Jews. And after the New York Times investigation found that many of the private religious schools denied students a basic education, top officials are now voicing serious concern. And now New York lawmakers are calling for more oversight of Hasidic schools. Now, the New York Times revealed that many of the schools taught only rudimentary English and math and virtually no science or history. The Times investigation, which I am going to point out is a very liberal left-wing publishing outlet, showed that Hasidic schools appear to be operating in violation of state law by denying thousands of students a basic education. Again, this is what the Times is reporting. We don't know for a fact this is all accurate. Now, the Hasidic community, operates more than 100 all-boys schools across Brooklyn and the lower Hudson Valley, which have received more than $1 billion in government money over the last 4 years alone. Again, I question these numbers. Allison is going to help me break this down. The schools typically provide only 90 minutes of day of secular instruction, just 4 days per week, and only for boys aged 8 to 12. As a result, the students are failing to learn secular subjects at extraordinarily high rates. The Times also found that more than 99% of students who took standardized tests in 2019 failed, and that one was according to state data. Here to break it all down for us is my friend, fellow mom, and super soul, Allison Josephs. And I have to say that this particular interview has been pre-recorded in order to observe and respect the Sabbath. Welcome to the show, superstar.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So these allegations in the story are deeply disturbing and either way have to be addressed. Allison, what do you say to this very troubling report?
So I say there is truth to it, and the truth is more nuanced than its reporting. And I think the first thing to sort of clarify is that there is no Hasidic community. There are many sort of groups within the Hasidic world. If only Jews had as much unity as the New York Times claimed. And at the bottom of the article, they do make some note in passing. It's not a monolith. And yet the way it's presented at the beginning, the leaders, are doing this and doing that. So I think the first thing to recognize is that there's a sliding scale of better performing schools and worse performing schools. I think, I haven't gotten deeply into the data. I've spoken to some people on the inside who have some questions on the data the New York Times reported. Not that it's all completely wrong. One of the issues that came up with one of the community organizer that I spoke to is that he said one of the issues in the testing was that there are certain passages that are not culturally appropriate for kids to read for, like, the English test, for instance. So just like there's a sense of certain minorities need certain types of tests, like recognizing that the SATs might not be culturally appropriate to certain people that grew up in certain populations, ethnically. I think what the Hasidic community needs to explain is that in some cases, they're going to need, English passages that would be appropriate to their standards. Just, not everything that's happening in the world today is everything they want to expose their children to. And so that might be a little bit of the discrepancy in terms of the test scores that we're seeing versus what the kids could actually do. That being said, I think it's important to sort of frame this community and understand where they're coming from. Another thing that was mentioned in the article is that the Hasidic community is, a Holocaust surviving community. I think we need to be very clear what that means. I grew up as a non-Orthodox Jew, as a conservative Jew. What that meant was that I was mixed into the larger world. Some of my friends were the descendants of Holocaust survivors, some were not. We mixed with everyone, basically. In the modern Orthodox world where I am now, similar type of thing. The Hasidic world is nearly 100% survivors or descendants of survivors of the Holocaust, and they essentially went into this closed system in order to self-preserve. And you have to imagine that with an atrocity, one of the greatest atrocities that mankind has ever known, happening only 70 years ago, and a community basically shutting down for fear of, being destroyed again, to self-preserve. You have to imagine that there are going to be different types of, dysfunctional behaviors that are going to grow in that space. That's not to excuse people not keeping the law or not being careful about, things like child safety. Child safety is such a basic thing within Jewish law, but I
just want to redirect it. I'm going to go into that child safety, but I want to go back to a quote because I want to be mindful of the time by Mr. Nadler, because he said it's a paramount duty of government to make sure that all children, whether it's those educated in private or public schools, are provided a quality education. And he's the senior Jewish member of the House, whose current district encompasses a major Hasidic neighborhood, and who himself was yeshiva educated. And he said that it's our duty to all New York students to ensure that the law is enforced. So he claims that the story is deeply disturbing and must be addressed. You very, very eloquently gave me another perspective, and I see the numbers, and I see how a story like this could very easily be spun the wrong way. And the New York Times, they are pros. They do this all day, every day. They even publish this in Yiddish, which we'll get to that. But State Senator Julia Salazar and Assemblywoman Emily Gallagher, both Democrats who represent heavily Hasidic Williamsburg, Brooklyn, said they were particularly alarmed by accounts of corporal punishment in the schools and would introduce legislation to ban such punishments going forward. Again, this is what the report is claiming. But other leaders, including Kathy Hochul, our governor, and members of a powerful state education board, showed less concern. So here you have some leaders that are very concerned, and you also have our governor who doesn't show as much concern as you would think. Why do you think this is the case?
I mean, I think, matters of my expertise is more religion than matters of politics. I think politicians are motivated by all sorts of things. And I can just tell you the Torah's perspective on government is to be wary of them and to assume that, there's ulterior motives. So it's hard to know what the motivation is. I would just sort of bring it back to, I believe there has been real organic progress in all the areas of secular education and particularly corporal punishment, but I don't think that it's perfect. I believe on the books still in private schools, you're allowed to hit a child in school, and in many states, maybe half the states in public schools as well. That's definitely problematic. What we're trying to encourage leaders to do right now, because we've been in talks with people who are talking to the leaders, I think we have to both explain the good that's been happening organically, the good that exists in the community that is exceptional, that other communities don't have at all, and also take an honest look at where we can grow and where we can improve. And the way that you move forward from here is they're not going to change overnight. With this sense of self-preservation and survival that is so ingrained in the community, they're not going to become, everything that, New York City or, these different government groups want them to do overnight. What they can do, I believe, is get better. I believe that they can, raise the level. I believe they can, bring better teachers in, work to get better curricula in, which is already happening organically, and also make sure that there are policies and procedures across the board for child safety and for consequences if something that's not allowed to happen does happen. This is already happening in a number of Hasidic schools, but the idea would be to roll this out in a more universal way. Policies and procedures obviously are not a foolproof plan, but we're seeing, for example, if you take U.S. gymnastics, this was an entity. They are not Holocaust survivors. They, do not have reason to try to be in survival mode, and yet there is a real thing that human beings do where we protect our institutions. We sort of keep things going as they were. And the way to change culture, take the Catholic Church, to change culture from within is really difficult in large institutions. It's hard to not be prideful. It's hard to admit that you've made a mistake. This time of year, actually, the days of awe for the Jewish people are exactly when we're supposed to be doing that self-reflection, to hear what went wrong, to acknowledge it. Part of the process of tshuva, of repentance, is to admit it and then to commit to being better. So one of my complaints about the New York Times article is that I really feel like they dabbled in anti-Semitic tropes. They use language of, separatism and Jews as sucking public funds. I want to just clarify the fact that they said $1 billion in 4 years. That's such an arbitrary number. What if they said 10 years, 30 years? The number would have been even bigger. Why did they come up with 4 years?
Right? Very true. So and you know what? Here's an interesting fact. We have about a minute and a half left before we go to commercial break. But New York Republican, including Rep. Lee Zeldin, a lot of these Republicans defended the schools and criticized the Times report. To your point, and at a campaign event just outside of City Hall earlier this month, Mr. Zeldin, who is running for governor against Ms. Hochul, he's Jewish. He suggested that public schools ought to be emulating the values of Hasidic schools, not the other way around. Of course, this is all very conflicting. Again, the leaders can't get it right. They all have their own opinion. But then we even have Benign Hamdan. He's the Republican candidate challenging Mr. Goldman in Brooklyn. Said that the state regulations were taking a shot at critical race theory, which brings something very interesting up, and I want to get back to that after the commercial break. But while public schools are teaching CRT and sexuality, Hasidic schools should continue to have the right to teach Judaism. So I do believe that the right to preserve is extremely important in this particular case. And many state Republicans said they believe the government should not interfere with private religious education or a parent's ability to choose whether their children are educated and in what capacity. So, I do echo those sentiments. But let's go back to that Times article. Why do you think they also chose to publish it in Yiddish? And what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you could take two different sides. On one side is you could say they want to reach to the most people they possibly could reach. And my organization works with former and questioning Hasidic Jews. So there is a range of how good the English is. But part of it is also the optics of it, to say, oh, well, your average person here can't even read in English. We have to put it in Yiddish. So I think the question is, how cynical are you on the motivation? Look, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. That's a Jewish value. I think that there is definitely an issue at hand that has to be dealt with. And I think also there is so much judgment put onto the community from outsiders, whereas other minority cultures are appreciated, their differences are celebrated. For Jews, it's kind of like you're gross, you're backwards, you're extreme, you have to get with the times. And I think that what we can do is to give the child the ability to have a career is the most basic value. This is in the Talmud, and a parent has to teach their child the trade to be able to support themselves. So that's something that, needs to be brought up in terms of Jewish values. But I think while we can improve that internally, we also want to be respected and appreciated like any other minority culture wants to be.
There you go. And with that said, we are out of time. Allison, you said it best. Thank you so much for coming on. You are amazing.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. That was our Millennial Mom segment brought to us by Caldwell Soames. Check out the awesome Allison Josephs. Her handle is @JewInTheCity, and head to her website, JewInTheCity.com. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Caldwell Soames Incorporated, investing globally in transformative businesses like Original Digital Corporation, or ODC. ODC develops advanced consumer and commercial fintech solutions such as OG Pay, which will transform the way you manage your money. From sending and receiving money globally for free, paying for goods and services in person and online, pay bills, buy and sell digital currencies, all while earning interest. OG Pay is easy to set up, FDIC insured, and your information is secured. Check out ogpay.com.
Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Welcoming back to our Millennial Mom segment brought to us by Caldwell Soames is the awesome Allison Josephs, founder of Jew in the City. And today we are talking about the recent New York Times article that painted a rather perhaps unfair picture of the Hasidic community and the education system. Now, one Hasidic politician, David Schwartz, he's a Hasidic district leader in Brooklyn, disputed reports of problems in the schools, including regular use of corporal punishment, saying, I and my community, tens of thousands of caring parents and educators, are unfairly being paintbrushed due to the accounts of very few. Allison, what do you say to the accounts of corporal punishment and to his statement?
As far as I understand, and I've seen people, both ex-Hasidic Jews and currently Hasidic Jews, tell me that it's gotten much better. I think we need to understand where this community came from. A couple generations ago, so many of the teachers were Holocaust survivors. They had been beaten by Nazis. They came to their schools and there was no mental health available. Nobody was talking about what happened to them. So unfortunately, tragically, a couple generations ago, there was more severe, corporal punishment happening in schools. Although, to be fair, my father also was hit in school with a ruler. So that was just sort of more of the way of the world. The world in general, thankfully, has moved to a state of not doing that as much. And I would say the Hasidic community has followed. But really what we need to do to be able to feel really confident about these numbers is put in place procedures and protocols. These types of safety measures have been brought to some Hasidic schools. But what I would say for this politician who said that this is so little, the best way that we prove this and feel secure in these numbers is to make sure that these policies and procedures are everywhere and that they're being followed. And not only can we ensure more safety across the board, we can also prove that we're using high standards if, media wants to come and make an accusation. And again, using policies and procedures in corporate settings and nonprofit settings, this is a newer type of thing that's happening in general. It's a great way to use this as best practices, but these aren't, if you take the Me Too movement what's it called? Intimacy coordinators. These are sort of concepts that we're kind of just waking up to. How do we make certain industries safer and more comfortable? And so I think the world is in a very good place as we're moving towards these types of rules and regulations. And I think the Hasidic community has to follow. Improvements were made organically. Improvements were made with some policies and procedures. Let's get it across the board so that we can really feel confident that it's taken place everywhere.
Well said. Well said. Okay, so now another thing here. The groundbreaking same New York Times article that we're talking about also drew tons of interest, Allison, for a very different reason. And the investigation was published online in Yiddish as well. And several Times employees said on background that the Yiddish version of the article had garnered more readership than a typical English story in the metropolitan section. One said it got more than 150,000 page views in the first 24 hours. Why do you think the reaction was so strong?
So look, they're not usually doing stories like this in Yiddish, and working with the ex-Hasidic population as my organization does, there are certainly people within the community that may dress fully Hasidic that are not fully happy with their lives. And this, first of all, was put into their language and gave them access. Now, some of those people reading may have been furious with the Times report. So it's not to say that every person reading, right, according to their metrics, is, marching down the street and in full agreement.
And waving it around. Yeah, this is the word of God, because it's not.
I think the thing about, as a content creator online, you don't know what your metrics mean. You know that it certainly got engagement. There was certainly a lot of buzz about this happening. I would say that there are probably some insiders that are saying, finally, someone is speaking on our behalf. We're frustrated. And other insiders are saying, this is outrageous. They're attacking us and criticizing us. as a person that tries to live in a space of nuance, I see both sides. I believe the community has so many beautiful things about it that should be appreciated. The Times would have done a much better job to spend some time really learning to appreciate the beautiful things that exist already, things that exist in terms of kindness, hospitality, nonprofit organizations, beautiful family values that other societies could learn from the Hasidic community. At the same time, that doesn't mean they're not above approach. At the same time, there's certainly where they could go, not to live up to the New York State values, but live up to Jewish values. We need to make sure that our kids are safe, that we've built the best systems to protect their safety. And even if they're going to spend many hours a day learning Torah, which is the values of the Hasidic community, they need to be able to get around in the world and to be able to support themselves. There is more of a sense of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of Amazon businesses that are owned. There are a lot of people that go into business. So it's not as much of a college educated type of population. That's not what their economy looks like. And I think it does work for many people. But there's nothing wrong with learning some of these basic subjects so that you understand and even appreciate God's world.
Absolutely. You said it. And this is why we have you on, Millennial Mom. You are amazing. Thank you so much for piping in and being the voice of reason in a world filled with chaos.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're awesome. Guys, definitely check out Allison Josephs at Jew in the City. Head to her website, jewinthecity.com. That was our Millennial Mom segment brought to us by Caldwell Soames. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. We'll be right back after this.